This is the 1933 Bentley 4¼ liter, a car so fast and so agile that it was able to compete in the 1950 24 Hours of Le Mans. And yes, I said that correctly. This 163 horsepower gas-guzzling racing machine was competitively viable against a slew of newer, faster, and shinier cars. So what made this Bentley so time-repellent, and who was its lunatic driver that raced all 24 Hours of Le Mans on his own? Well, his name is Eddie Hall, and this is his untold story. Edward Ramsden Hall was born on July 17, 1900, in an affluent Yorkshire family. He grew up in a small town called Kirkburton and enjoyed financial security in his youth. He was the heir to his parents' successful fabric company, which he later used to fund his motorsport adventures. He was a tall, strong man, and his competitive drive led him to become a member of Great Britain's bobsleigh team in the 1928 Winter Olympics. While Eddie's team did not earn a medal, he and his team did place higher than Britain's #1 team. Though he had a promising start, he didn't pursue this venture further. Despite the exhilarating life of full-time sewing and weaving that awaited him, or the monotonous career of being an Olympic champion, Eddie realized his prowess was not behind a sewing machine, but rather a racing machine. Eddie launched his racing career in 1923, and using his inherited wealth, he was able to buy his own Talbot and Bugatti to kickstart his journey. Exactly what we would expect a 23-year-old novice to do. But despite his anticipation to race, he never let his impatience get the best of him. In fact, Hall spent his first 5 years nearly exclusively on hill climbs. Then, in 1930, Hall came second in a 500-mile BRDC race with another driver. And the following year, he came third, but this time he was the only man behind the wheel. By 1933, Hall was inaugurated as a member of the British Racing Drivers Club, and for the third time, he competed in their 500-mile race. Thanks to his partnership with motor company Morris Garages and his girlfriend and later wife Joan, who acted as team manager, Eddie only needed one pit stop to complete the entire race. And this was no buzzer beater, no. He reached the finish line a mind-blowing 29 minutes before his runner-up. After his dominant victory, he raced in Italy's Mille Miglia in 1934 and 1935. This was a one-lap, 1,000-mile endurance race that was hosted 24 times from 1927 to 1957. This was Eddie's most intense endurance race to date, and while Eddie did later prove that he was up to the challenge, neither of his cars were. In 1934, Eddie and his wife were forced to retire from the race due to his MG's mechanical problems, and the following year, his Aston Martin also broke down from the same problems. It was around this time that Eddie finally started using his 1933 Bentley 3.5 liter. After driving the Bentley for around 4,000 miles, Eddie realized he had something special. Though the car was fast, it was still too slow to compete with the new, cutting-edge cars. To alleviate this issue, Eddie lobbied Rolls-Royce to manufacture a new engine for his Bentley, and an old bodywork company called Offord & Sons to create a new bespoke body for the car. This would make it competitively viable in long endurance races so that it could keep up with newer, factory-backed cars. After some negotiating, Rolls-Royce accepted, and in 1936, his Bentley sported an upgraded 163 horsepower 4¼ liter engine. In the upgraded Speedster's debut race, the Tourist Trophy, Hall's Bentley set a new record for the fastest average speed of 80.81 miles per hour. Despite being at the height of his career, Eddie had to temporarily stop racing due to French worker strikes and then the Second World War. During this hiatus, Eddie took this time to work on other hobbies he had worked on behind the scenes. Eddie ended up publishing a book about modern figure skating in 1938, which contained action shots of skaters from the European Figure Skating Champions in St. Moritz. A fellow author named T.D. Richardson wrote in the introduction, "It was highly entertaining to see Mr. Hall laden with cameras and gadgets, prowling around the rinks, stalking his prey in the hope of catching a new or unusual angle, or laying flat on his tummy for hours so that he might get a single shot. Young skaters are often possessed of temperaments, but Mr. Hall's patience and good humor overcame all difficulties. Fortunately, he was more or less unscathed by this setback. After the war ended, in 1950, Eddie Hall took on the oldest and most prestigious endurance race ever, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Now, Le Mans has its reputation for a reason. It's a grueling experience for any driver who attempts it, and even those who are up for the task are often disappointed when they have mechanical failures, crashes, or design failures. I'm looking at you, Mercedes CLK.
Here we go. Oh my god! Oh my god! The Mercedes has taken off!
But these obstacles were no match for Hall and his Bentley. Eddie actually did try to enter the big race in 1937, but historical events forced him to postpone. Finally, in 1950, he made it into the second post-war 24 Hours of Le Mans. Eddie took the wheel to begin the race, and unbeknownst to his co-driver Tom Clark, he would be stuck in the pits for the entire race.
Drivers race for their cars as Europe's most grueling car race begins. Tension mounts as Louis Rosier creeps up in number 5. Headlights pierce the night, but it's a morning after for those who watch. Great Britain did well with 4 out of the first 6 places. But France wins with 54-year-old Louis Rosier driving 23 hours to his son's 1.
Of the 60 cars competing in the race, only 29 completed all 24 hours. And of those 29 cars, Eddie Hall, racing on his own in a 17-year-old Bentley, placed 8th amongst the slew of brand new cars. He had an average speed of 82.9 miles per hour and a top speed of 133.5 miles per hour. To this day, Eddie Hall is the only driver who has ever completed the 24 Hours of Le Mans by himself, and given many rule changes since 1950, it's an achievement that nobody can or will ever match. Now, there are many questions a person might ask about how a person could race for an entire day without having any breaks. And after the race, one reporter asked one such question. "So what were your toilet arrangements?" Reporter Dennis Jenkinson asked. Hall smirked and replied, "Green overalls, old boy." This was the only question about the race that I could find. So after this incredible race, Eddie was inspired to race again in the following year's 24 Hours of Le Mans. But this time, he drove a Ferrari 340 America. Unfortunately, Hall was forced to retire from the race due to his prancing horse's battery problems during the 13th hour. A few months later, Hall repaired his Ferrari and raced in the RAC Tourist Trophy, but for the first time in his career, he crashed and totaled the Ferrari. He was forced to retire from the race, and this time, Eddie Hall also retired from the racing scene. Eddie Hall spent the following decades living with his wife in a cozy Monte Carlo apartment which overlooked part of the Grand Prix circuit. He lived there until his passing on May 12, 1982. Eddie lived a great life. He was extremely patient, and he undertook a monumental challenge that few before him had tried, and even fewer could match. Friends and family also reported that he had an excellent sense of humor, which had helped him overcome his outlandish obstacles. Surprisingly, Hall's story is not well known despite his incredible achievement, and although several drivers had come close to racing all 24 hours, Eddie was the only one to see it through. Let me know what you think about this story in the comments, and hit those YouTube buttons that everyone's always talking about, and I'll see you all in the next video.